20 years have passed since notorious Indo-Canadian gangster Bindi Joe Hall was assassinated on a crowded nightclub floor. His murder remains unsolved. Any brown kid from around Vancouver, BC and Canada surely had to have heard the name Bindi Joe Hall at least once in their lives. Bhupinder Bindi Singh Joe Hall was not your average, conventional gangster. His name is not feared as much as it is respected, and even beloved. Prior to his reign of organized crime on the west coast of Canada, Indian/brown people were facing large amounts of discrimination/racism/scrutiny from the locals. There was a lot of racial tension and hate crimes being committed against them, but Bindi changed the landscape for things. With his ruthless, violent nature, he gave the Indo-Canadian community a symbol of hope and resistance to the violence they had faced. He never thought twice to put a racist on a stretcher, and would even go out of his way to kill those within his ranks who had harmed innocent people. He left a legacy that would carry on to this day. But who killed him? Who was Bindi Joe Hall? Born Bhupinder Singh Joe Hall on January 17, 1971, in Punjab, India, to a Punjabi Sikh family, Bindi Joe Hall had immigrated to Canada from an early age. From childhood, Bindi showed signs of sociopathy and a blatant hatred for authority. Although he did well in school, his anger issues often led to him acting reckless, which got him expelled from Charles Tupper Secondary School in Vancouver, for brutally assaulting his principal. He had moved to Richmond, BC with his family, and there, he attended McNair Secondary School, where he was arrested after smashing the windows of a car in the school parking lot. He was also arrested for beating up two men in a bar with a broken bottle. His exceptional performance in school, however, did allow for him to attend college, but after one semester, he had dropped out, and soon began his criminal career working as a hitman for Jimmy and Ron Dosanjh, two Indo-Canadian gangsters from the Metro Vancouver area. He rose through the ranks, after being allowed into the organization known as the Punjabi Mafia, which now consists of multiple separate gangs currently warring over the Vancouver area. His associates described him as an extremely violent person, who would often torture his targets sadistically, and wouldn't hesitate to kill even the closest of his friends if they rubbed him the wrong way. He had even once held a notorious Chinese triad gangster, Randy Chan, for ransom in exchange for 5 kilos of cocaine. He was responsible for many murders of high-profile murders of gang members in and around Vancouver. In 1994, he was arrested and suspected of the murder of his associates, the Dosanjh brothers. The Dosanjhs had allegedly previously been paid a $200,000 contract to kill Bindi, and in addition to this, Joe Hall did not like their overall style of never getting their hands dirty, and only hiring others to kill their victims, and never doing it themselves. The most expensive trial in British Columbia. Bindi's trial for these murders was one of the most expensive trials in all of Canadian history, due to the sheer amount of security needed. Prior to his arrest for Jimmy's murder, he had went on live TV and gave an interview, saying this Jimmy Dosanjh, they portrayed him as a hitman, this that. Personally, from what I've seen of him on the street, I don't think he could have hid his way out of a paper bag. His former brother-in-law, Peter Gill, was also tried. Both were acquitted in the murders, however, and it was before the second trial that Joe Hall would meet his untimely fate. The Great Joe Hall Falls. At the Palladium nightclub in Vancouver, BC, on December 20, 1998, at about 4:30 a.m., Bindi was dancing on the crowded nightclub floor, when a shot rang out from behind. Bindi Joe Hall was dead at 27 years old, shot dead in the back of the head. The hit was so professional that not one person was able to give out a detail on the shooter. He left no trail, and no evidence. 4 months prior, a number of his former associates had been murdered themselves. One of Joe Hall's old associates, Bal Batar, had confessed to hiring the hit on Bindi, but he was never convicted. He would have faced only up to 10 years for this killing, if he was convicted. He said that he had felt pressured to do it, due to Bindi's animal nature. This is largely still unconfirmed, as no arrests have been made. The question remains: who did kill him? Whoever did, must have had an insane amount of expertise to make such a clean shot, so quickly that no one had seen him. Or was it just fear that the witnesses had if they had identified him? Could it have been Batar, or anyone else within his ranks? The chance? 300 people were present, and yet no one was able to identify him. Today, the various remnants of the Punjabi Mafia, consisting mostly of upper-class Sikh Punjabis, cite Joe Hall as their inspiration, in their ongoing turf wars. Bindi was Vancouver's first celebrity gangster. They take inspiration from the way he stood up to racial injustice, and how he made large amounts of money in a ruthless manner. The Disappearance of RO. Real name, Rogist Kane. Location, Los Angeles, California. Date of disappearance, February 18, 1986 Occupation, Parks and Recreation Department worker. Date of birth, October 12, 1924 Height, 5 feet 7 inches. Weight, 165 ibs. Marital status, widowed. Characteristics, African American male. Black hair, brown eyes. Details, Rogest Kane had always hoped to create a better life for his 7 children. In 1958, he moved from Mississippi to Los Angeles, California, and was able to give his children advantages that he never had. By 1986, Rogest was 62 and worked for the Department of Parks and Recreation. However, on the afternoon of February 18, 1986, he left his home, telling his sister that he was going to a hardware store. He never returned. Since his disappearance, several clues have surfaced to suggest that he is still alive. On February 19, he called a neighbor and told her that he was not feeling well and could not go to work. When he did not come home, his family called the police. They also contacted hospitals and other relatives. 2 days later, a private security company in an affluent neighborhood spotted a man who they believed to be Rogest. The man appeared confused and gave the officers a phone number that belonged to his sister, Teresa. However, when Teresa came to pick up her brother, he again disappeared. 1 month later, Rogest's car was found parked on a busy street 22 miles from his home. All of his papers, his GI Bill, the deed to his property, his insurance policies, his glasses, and his false teeth were all in his car. There were also pieces of paper that had his daughter's phone number written several times. His family believes that he was trying to remember her number. At the gas station next to his abandoned car, authorities learned that Rogest had talked to a mechanic on the day after he disappeared. The mechanic said that he repaired parts of Rogest's car and Rogest paid him in cash. The mechanic said that Rogest was slurring his speech and walking oddly. He last saw Rogest walking down the street away from the gas station. Authorities and Rogest's family believe that he may have suffered a stroke and is suffering from memory loss. Authorities discovered that Rogest's telephone credit card had been used several times since he was seen by the security company. The calls made on Rogest's card were traced. All of them were numbers from help wanted ads in a local newspaper. It is believed that when he became lost, Rogest had the need to find work so that he could get money. Although he was memory impaired, he still realized that he needed money and knew he had to call places to find work. Authorities and his family believe that he was picked up by law enforcement or a paramedic and transported to a hospital for medical treatment as a John Doe. They hope that he is still being taken care of somewhere. However, no evidence has been found to suggest if he is still alive. 2 years later, foul play was not suspected in his disappearance. The case is unresolved. When the story first aired on several viewers called claiming that a man living in their Topeka, Kansas neighborhood named Elmer Jackson might have been Rogest. The viewers noted that Jackson did not have any dentures and had a scar on his body that matched Rogest's. Unfortunately, he disappeared before police could question him. Within days, Rogest's son Lynn flew to Topeka to aid police in the search. They have since learned that he lived in Topeka for about a year after a truck driver brought him there. He had apparently worked several jobs, including as a bricklayer. Lynn and the police canvassed the neighborhood where Rogest apparently lived, but they were unsuccessful. Rogest was declared legally dead in 1995. Sadly, he has never been found. Rogest is the father of former NFL player Lynn Kane, who was interviewed for the segment on He is also the grandfather of rapper will.i.am. On March 22, 1975, 62-year-old custodian Helen Tobolsky was murdered at Notre Dame College, becoming the campus's first ever homicide victim. A bizarre message was found scrawled on a chalkboard near Helen that read, February 21, 1975, the day I died. On the morning of March 22, 1975, 62-year-old Helen Tobolsky arrived at her job at the University of Notre Dame where she worked as a custodian. Helen punched her time card at 7 a.m. She gathered her cleaning materials and filled a mop bucket with water before heading over to the campus aerospace engineering building. At 9 a.m. an engineering professor named Dr. Hugh Ackert entered the building. As he walked from the offices to the machine shop, he found Helen lying in a hallway in a pool of blood. She had been shot in the head. Written on a blackboard in the classroom across from Helen was a bizarre message. February 21, 1975, the day I died. An autopsy revealed that Helen had been shot at close range in her left ear with a small caliber gun. Helen's body was discovered at the north end of a hallway, while her mop bucket was found, unused, at the south end of the hallway. Both of the doors were locked Friday evening. However, they discovered the door near Helen's body had been forced open and a small window on the door was broken. Investigators speculate that Helen's killer was already inside of the building when Helen arrived at work that morning. Most of the cleaning staff normally did not arrive until 8 a.m. But Helen would always arrive early to earn overtime pay. They believe Helen may have surprised the possible burglar, and was shot in the process. However, the only thing that appeared to be missing was Helen's wallet that she kept inside of her purse. The building housed huge pieces of machinery and equipment, such as wind tunnels, that would be impossible to steal. The mysterious message on the blackboard was never officially confirmed to be Helen's handwriting, but police speculate that it's possible Helen was forced to write the message, and got confused about the date. They questioned students and staff, but no one took responsibility for the strange message. The police took the blackboard as evidence. Helen had no known enemies. Helen married her husband, John, in 1933. John suddenly passed away in 1962 and Helen never remarried. They had 2 children, one who passed away at the age of 2 in 1941. The same year John passed away, Helen began working as a custodian for Notre Dame. She worked there for 12 years, and according to her co-workers, enjoyed her job very much and was loved by all of the staff. This was the first homicide ever reported on the Notre Dame campus. A $5,000 reward was offered by the school for information about Helen's murder. Unfortunately, no one came forward. Helen's case went cold, and remains unsolved 45 years later. Jim Rice disappeared in July 1986. Did his wife have him killed? James Merrill's Jim Rice had served his country with distinction in World War II, a decorated bomber pilot. He went on to create a construction business after the war that eventually amounted to a personal fortune of over $2 million. His sudden disappearance and the subsequent events around it in 1986 continued to puzzle investigators. Astardi Davis. Jim Rice met Astardi Davis in 1970. Despite already being married and having children, he fell in love with her and divorced his then-wife to marry her. Astardi Davis had been born as Bill White in 1931 and had 3 adult sons from a previous marriage. Together the couple moved to Kona, Hawaii in order to launch a charter fishing company. Astardi and Jim eventually separated in 1981. She moved back to California. They later reconciled and moved to the island of St. Croix, where they built their dream home on an isolated bluff overlooking the sea. The disappearance. In July 1986, Jim had surgery scheduled back in California and planned to fly home to stay with his daughter Kathleen from his first marriage before and after the procedure. She last heard from him on the 20th of July when he called to tell her he would be spending a week at her home before the surgery. She had expected him to arrive by July 29th, but he never arrived. For the next 2 weeks she tried in vain to contact his home on St. Croix to find out what had happened. Once she finally got through, it was to have her phone answered by Astardi. She told her that Jim had left her for an Australian woman and gone to live in Australia with her. When his daughter called again a few days later, she was told he had actually flown to Miami. Confused by the conflicting stories, Jim's daughter hired a private investigator to look into her father's disappearance. The investigation. The private investigator quickly located a customs declaration document dated July 28, 1986 that appeared to have a forged signature belonging to Jim Rice. He immediately notified the FBI and they looked into the matter. The FBI discovered that a person had bought a ticket from St. Croix to Miami in Jim's name, but that they did not match his description. Witness statements later identified Astardi, her youngest son Noble Davis, and his girlfriend as having been on the flight. The private investigator had continued his own search and uncovered a document filed by Astardi a week before Jim's disappearance that made her the controller of his entire estate. One of these documents was described as a literal cut-and-paste job in which Astardi's name had been glued over the name of Jim's daughter Kathleen. The investigator came to the conclusion Jim had likely come to harm after his July 20th conversation with Kathleen and the July 21st meeting between Astardi and a notary. Criminal and unusual actions by Astardi. The yacht fire. During the investigation, it was discovered that the reason for the earlier separation between Jim and Astardi was over criminal charges that were about to be leveled at her and Noble over the destruction of Jim's yacht in 1981. Jim's yacht, the Blue Hawaii, had been moored in the harbor at Kona when it was rocked by a massive explosion. Noble had been on board and was badly injured while his mother Astardi had been standing on the dock. Investigators at the time were suspicious of a large insurance policy Astardi had taken out on the yacht and questioned Noble's explanation that he had been cleaning the boat with gasoline at 2 a.m. Charges were filed, but Astardi and her son had fled Hawaii by that time. She filed for bankruptcy upon returning to California and then spent a year in prison for illegal forging of documents. She reconciled with Jim upon her release in 1983. The sale of Jim's property. The investigator learned during his time in St. Croix that Astardi had sold off a lot of personal items of Jim shortly after his disappearance. These items included his truck and clothing in a large garage sale. Two 40-foot trailers, a cement mixer and construction gear had also been sold at rock-bottom prices. At the same time, several deeds and other documents had been altered which effectively transferred ownership of Jim's remaining property to Astardi and her sons. The suspicious letter. 4 months after his disappearance, Jim apparently wrote to his daughter Kathleen. She was immediately suspicious and had it examined. The letter was typed and his signature was forged at the end of the letter. At several places in the letter a grammatical error occurred in which I am was written iam. This matched earlier mistakes made by Astardi Davis when forging documents. This confirmed for Jim's daughter that his new wife had been involved in his disappearance beyond a shadow of a doubt. Fugitive. Astardi was charged with mail and bank fraud in 1989 but disappeared from house